Hello and welcome to the McKinnon Prize in Political Leadership. Two wonderful winners will be announced in this conversation, and I'm very excited to be the person having these big conversations. My name is Patricia Carvelis. I'm a host at the ABC in both radio and television, and politics is in my blood and is what I do every day. So both of these people are people that I have a lot to do with and I watch on the television screen, in interviews. They are the people that we see every day talking about the big issues in our country. The McKinnon Prize in Political Leadership is a non-partisan and independent award recognising outstanding political leadership in all levels of government. The first of its kind in Australia, each year the prize acknowledges leaders who have successfully tackled big issues, vital issues of public policy. They've overcome adversity and achieved real change for the public good in two categories. The first category is the McKinnon Political Leader of the Year, and the other category is the McKinnon Emerging Political Leader of the Year. It is my great pleasure to reveal who these people are. The Honorary Greg Hunt MP, who's the Federal Minister for Health and Aged Care, was named the McKinnon Political Leader of the Year in 2020, recognised for his leadership in spearheading Australia's health response to the COVID-19 pandemic during 2020. Dr. Anne Ali MP, who's the Federal Member for Cowan in Western Australia, has been named the McKinnon Emerging Political Leader of the Year for her work in advocating for action to prevent violence against women and children and exposing extremist groups to greater government scrutiny. It is my great pleasure to have both of them in this fireside chat. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks very much, Patricia. And thank you, Anne, and congratulations to Anne. And look, it's just an honour and a privilege to be here. And obviously, at my level, I simply represent the doctors and the nurses and the health officials and all of the state officials and territory officials. But it's a wonderful award, and it's just it's nice that Australia's health response has been recognised, and it's all those people that have done all the right things that have made all the difference.
Well, congratulations to both of you. The criteria for both of these awards is a little bit different. The McKinnon Political Leader of the Year, which you have achieved, Greg Hunt, is obviously the overall winner, but the Emerging Political Leader of the Year is the one to watch, if you like, and is a really important recognition for somebody who's really emerging and breaking through the barriers. What we want to do in this conversation is really zoom out from that 24-hour news cycle questioning that you're usually exposed to from me and talk about the big issues. And I want to start with you, Greg, and ask, in today's environment, what does good leadership look like? What are the ingredients and how heavily do you think about this?
Look, I do think about this. If I could bring it down to one central concept, I would call it dialogue. And that's a dialogue, because often people will say somebody is not listening, or they will say that a leader is simply driven by public opinion. And the truth is, it's, in my view, a dialogue. And it may sound odd, but at ages 16 and 17, I was thinking about this as we were studying and looking at it. And at that stage, the framework that I developed was, it's a two-way process. You have to be able to listen, but you also have to be able to set out a framework and test it. And so it's continuous dialogue. And this last year, these last 2 years, the time in government has reaffirmed that for me. So that central notion of a dialogue, a genuine one where you're listening, but there are multiple voices. You then have to make a decision, and then you're explaining. And so whilst that's the central concept, the two things that back it up are a sort of a deep executable plan, and then information and explanation. But that's my view, and I think those sort of youthful visions haven't really changed in terms of the concept, and it's been reaffirmed, for me at least, by the last 2 years.
Dr. Ali, how do you think about that idea of good leadership? I mean, good is such a subjective word.
It sure is. Well, first of all, Patricia, I'd like to echo Greg's sentiments on what an honour it is to receive this award and congratulate Greg on achieving this this year as well. I actually, when I got asked to run for politics, I thought long and hard about what leadership is and what political leadership is. And I actually did what I always do when I have a burning question and conducted a little research project for myself. And then when I won this award, I thought, you know, what does that mean? What does political leadership mean? And why did I get this award? So I actually did more research. And I ended up doing a little survey of my parliamentary colleagues, asking them about leadership. And I wanted to compare the results of that survey to the results of the McKinnon survey, where in the McKinnon survey, people said that they wanted to see in their political leaderships, in their political leaders, integrity and ethical behaviour. So I asked my colleagues the same 4 questions. I said, you know, what is it that you see in yourself as a political leader? What do you think political leadership is for yourself? What do you think the people who you represent want to see in political leadership? What do you think the institution of politics values? And what role do those values play in political life? And the results were very interesting because while the public said that integrity was most important to them, my political colleagues said that vision and the ability to listen were the 2 most important qualities for them. I think that's a very interesting thing. I guess for myself, you know, it is those things as well. When I think about why I left a career in academia and accepted the offer to run for politics, for me it was about, you know, the ability to make change, the ability to change political will, and in many ways also to challenge the institution of politics as well. And I think those things take a certain kind of ability to stick to your values, to exercise good judgment, and to stand up and challenge things when you see things that need to be challenged.
I suppose I really want to try and interrogate this idea of good leadership in a 24-hour news cycle where, you know, and I'm part of this both problem and what I think is also really important for accountability. I see it as a good thing as well, which is that the stories change, things are fast moving. How do you stand above that, get beyond the noise and have a prolonged and long-term impact? How do you deal with that, Greg? Because, I mean, you know, you get a gazillion media requests a day. There is things move from hour to hour. How do you zoom out and keep that consistency while also dealing with a kind of contemporary structure of the way we communicate?
Sure. Actually, there's a very important proof point or evidence point to what you're saying. My team in my ministerial office let me know recently that they had just passed the 30,000 media inquiries pandemic. And so that was quite a surprise. So they're getting, you know, in the order of 100 a day. And so that is a constant pressure. So then the only way to deal with that is to step back and focus on what are the great challenges and what are the great responsibilities or needs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the dialogue is the way of engaging with the public, the stakeholders and others. But the stepping back to try to look at, you know, what are the big emerging issues, and therefore where do you need to take the country? What do you need to learn yourself? And for me, my vehicle for doing that is running or walking. I will go, and that's when I do my deep contemplation and try to think, you know, what are the big trends or threats that are coming, whether that's geostrategic, whether that's systemic, whether that's in terms of the phases of the disease. Now, that's all informed by what you've heard from others, but then you have to step back and then I write it down. I try to synthesize it into, you know, the challenge, the options, and then the preferred approach, and then you test that. We've used the cabinet both through the National Security Committee, the Budget Committee and the full Cabinet as the means of testing those. But it's that time to step back, to try to look at the central question. And I think of it as my time on the vision and the central question. And then you test that in multiple environments.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer. Dr. Ali, obviously there's a lot of noise in politics and incremental developments, and people like me demand that you answer what just happened 30 seconds ago, right? That's my job. How do you move away from it to try and do what you have done, pushing issues around extremism and putting that into national focus, domestic violence, some of the issues that might not be centre stage? How do you think about that?
Well, I'll go back to Greg's answer about dialogue, which I thought was really a perfect way to answer this question. Is I think that most people accept that what they see on the media, perhaps even what they see on Question Time, is a veneer of what goes on in Parliament, what really goes on. It's just that kind of that thin veneer of, it's almost vaudevillian in its performance.
A performance, yeah.
It is a performance. But having dialogue with people, being able to go out and talk to people. And I was just last night, actually, I was giving a talk to a women's group who work with domestic violence victims. And they asked me the same question. And I said, for me, the privilege, the platform that we have as politicians, as parliamentarians, is being able to go out and talk to people, getting beyond that veneer, having that dialogue, sharing stories and finding a human connection with people, I think is a really important part of dialogue, of exchange, of listening, actively listening and actively participating in a conversation with people. So I think that for me, being out there, being able to talk to individuals, to groups, people that I represent, people who have an issue, who are advocating on a particular issue, that really is an important way of informing what I want to do and what I do, setting my agenda. And then in terms of the political process itself, Greg knows if I want something around health, I'll call him directly and have a chat to him about it. I think that's really important, to be able to have personal connections, not just with the people that you represent, but with the people that you're working with as well. I see myself and Greg as colleagues. We might be on other sides of the table, but we are colleagues. We all work in the same place, and in my mind, we are working towards the same goal, which is a better country, a better future for the children of Australia, and a nation that can be and achieve all that it can be.
Can I just add something to what Anne said there, which I think was very, very wise and very observant? There was, in exactly that vein, there was something that my father said to me. He was a Victorian member of the upper house, and he absolutely rejected the term politician. He said, others may think of you that way, but you, at your best, are a parliamentarian, and that's an entirely different concept. And that's exactly what Anne was just describing. And, we happen to have worked together on a number of issues that Anne, as a parliamentarian, has brought to me. And I value that in the way she's approached that. But it's also, if there are new members coming in on either side, I say, you're not a politician unless you think you are. You should be a parliamentarian, because that's the vocation, this sense of a higher calling and purpose. The parliament is about being a representative, but also in a representative democracy, you're elected to speak for, but you're elected to make decisions in your own right, which goes back to the dialogue. But just that difference in terminology between a parliamentarian, as Anne outlined and described it, and a politician, who is somebody who is just simply focused on the power rather than all of the responsibilities of state.
Oh, I'm with you, Greg. I get a bit uncomfortable when people call me a politician. I'm like, really feel like a politician.
Well, it's a bit of a dirty word, isn't it, sometimes?
It is. It's a little bit like that. And yeah, I much prefer the term parliamentarian.
What I find really interesting about what you've both just revealed is it's something I don't think the public knows enough about. And I'm sure that's on us too, as the sort of fourth estate, as journalists, for not highlighting it enough. Lots of reasons why we don't. We do focus on the tensions or the drama rather than the cooperation. But I worked for a decade in Parliament House. I still work on politics but from a different state now. And what I do know is that you often work together, right? The fact that you can call Greg and say, hey, I've got this issue around, I don't know, reproductive rights in my electorate, and that he might, say, oh, okay, we'll work on that. People don't know enough about that. But Dr. Anne Ali, I think this is a good place to talk about it. How much of that is actually about being good political leaders or parliamentarians doing that work, and how often does it happen?
Absolutely. And Patricia, I hear what you're saying about the 24-hour cycle in the media. And I think you kind of accept that there's a place for that. There's a place where, you're going to go on the media and do afternoon briefing and be adversarial with whoever else is on that panel. And that's kind of part and parcel of the role that you take on. But there are a whole lot of other opportunities where you're on panels with a member from the other side, with another colleague, where you're able to explore things in depth. And I like those opportunities. I try and take those opportunities whenever they arise to have more in-depth conversations like we're having now. And I imagine that many other members have those same opportunities, and I hope that they take those opportunities as well. But, it's difficult not to make friends with, people who are your political adversaries. You end up going on trips with them. I spent 3 days in a submarine with Julian Simmons just quite recently. Now, 3 days in a submarine, you are going to have to get along, right? And so I think, whenever I have an opportunity to speak to people, whether it's students at a school or women's groups like I did last night, or people who come and see me, I make sure that I talk about this side of politics. I make sure that I talk about the work that's done behind that thin veneer.
I want to ask you this question, Greg Hunt, because I think this has been a really huge event, this pandemic, that will change us forever. I wonder what your reflections are on how the pandemic has changed leadership in Australia.
I think there are a couple of things. And again, let me start with a little bit of an anecdote, in that in my community, I live on the Mornington Peninsula, just south of Melbourne, in a town called Mount Martha. And there you're just Greg. People know you as a dad, you're a soccer dad or a ballet dad, or they also know you're the local member and you have this national role. Nobody gets fussed. And sometimes I'll do media down by the estuary or at the surf club. People look, occasionally they're interested, but nobody really gets fussed. At the height of the pandemic in March last year, when the fear was at its absolute greatest and we were seeing Italy and Spain and France, I was doing an outdoor doorstop and I saw that people started to gather, and 5 became 10, became 20, became 30. As I was giving a report on where this was going and what we could do and that there was a pathway, people naturally distanced. It was just at the start of the distancing. And I was outside and I realised I just completely forgot the camera, and I just spoke to that group of people. And I'd never seen that level of engagement or fear, and the sense of giving people hope. That sense of hope was what was the most important thing, not unvarnished, not unrealistic, but realistic hope. And that was the first thing, that you were the custodian of national mood and national values. And you could either go high or low. And we consciously chose to do our very best, maybe imperfectly at times, but to go high. Then the second thing is, the National Cabinet, imperfect and flawed, it was nevertheless a reflection on history. And the history was the states totally fractured 100 years ago during the Spanish flu, and we were very conscious of that. And so that was created to deal with what we knew would be a federal pressure, and there have undoubtedly been federal pressures, but compared with what could have been the case, I think it made a dramatic difference. And so it has, to an extent, not washed away all of the history of federation, but structured it for the inevitable pressures of the time. So one on mood, in terms of, it's just fundamental to deliver hope, and one on structure.
How do you contemplate that idea, Anali? Do you think it's changed leadership, the pandemic?
Definitely. I think that was a fantastic anecdote that you gave there, Greg. And from myself, I've personally witnessed it as well. I think that, people were tuning in every day to listen to their leaders and to hear what they had to say. People who were politically disengaged, perhaps couldn't name who their local member was, perhaps didn't even know who the Federal Minister for Health was, were tuning in every day to the television, to the press conferences. And I think it would be interesting. I mean, we've got all of these surveys that have shown that people are politically disengaged, that they have become highly disengaged from politics in Australia. It'd be interesting to run a survey like that now and just to see how much the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted on the ways in which people view their political leaders, and perhaps the faith that they have in their political leaders and the trust that they have in their political leaders. For all that it is, the pandemic was also an opportunity, I think, to restore trust and faith in political leadership, because people looked, many for the first time, to their political leaders for guidance, for reassurance. In one of the most, the most insecure times that we've seen, at least in my lifetime, people wanted security. They wanted some level of certainty, knowing that there wasn't really a perfect level of certainty that they could get, but they wanted some level of certainty, some level of assurance, and they wanted to be informed, perhaps more now than they have ever been in the last at least 2 decades or so. So I think it'd be really interesting to do a survey now and compare that to previous surveys about political disengagement, trust and faith in political leadership.
I think you're right. I think the engagement has skyrocketed. I just look at our ratings and people are turning to us like never before because they want to hear their politicians talk, because it's a real life problem for them. When you are locked down and everything changes in your life, you want to look at what the policy answer is going to be. You want the political leadership because it's tangible in your life. So, Greg Hunt, you are the Minister for Health during the big crisis of our health in this country. How has it tested your leadership? What's challenged you the most?
I think it's not the scope of the problem, it's the unrelenting moment, as I call it. And the unrelenting moment relates to the point about the frequency of requests, but probably the least advantageous technological development in the last 10 years has been WhatsApp. It leads to a blizzard of incoming. And so for me, it's managing the inflow has been the biggest test. And honestly, that can every now and then get you down, or when there are too many things happening simultaneously. It's the simultaneous nature that can lead you to being a bit frustrated. So again, people I know and trust, they say, put the phone down, go and have your walk. It'll still be there. And so that's the reminder. And then the other thing, of course, is not being a good enough dad. And that's really been the hardest part. I've got a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son, and not having been present for enough of that time, or even when I'm physically present, not being emotionally present. So they're the things I have to work on. Probably the best decision that I made at a personal level was to ask my family, and the best decision they made was to agree. They all came up to Canberra for 3 months last year, and my kids went to school there, and I was able to focus on the job but actually have the time and see them, and that actually was just liberating. I could just breathe when they were there. And for me, in a good day, I need exercise, something creative, something values-based, but above all else, I need family time. And that was a chance to combine them. So it's up and down. It's been unrelenting, but at the same time, I'm surrounded by good people. But if I get that family time, then that lifts who I am as a person.
It provides that reset for sure. Dr. Anne Ali, has the pandemic provided, do you think, a reset for leadership when it comes to evidence-based decision-making? Throughout this pandemic, we've heard about the science and the health advice, and I feel like never before have the facts determined the outcomes quite like this. And I've found that quite a positive moment for our country. Do you agree?
Oh, I do agree. It's a positive, definitely a positive moment. Can I just also say to Greg, I really appreciated your last answer. I don't think anybody knows the toll that this takes and the challenges that you just spoke of there so eloquently. I really do appreciate that answer. As someone with adult children, I don't have to worry about the things that you have to worry about with young children or younger children. So I really appreciate that. I do think it's provided a reset, but I also think at the same time, perhaps that reset is more in the public mind than in the kind of, in the work of Parliament, because I think, Parliament has, and for me at least, policy decisions have always been based on evidence and fact, and that dialogue that Greg talked about, talking to people, gathering the facts, gathering whether it's the science or, talking to, if it's something on health, talking to both medical professionals and people who are impacted by health decisions. And I think that's the case for most parliamentarians, is that the way in which we do our work is informed by facts, is informed by dialogue, as Greg mentioned. I think what it's done is, in the public mind, it's brought forward that it's an opportunity for the public to see that actually we don't operate so much in a bubble, even though Canberra is often described as a bubble, but within that bubble, I guess, we do take advice. The experts and professionals in the field do have an opportunity to meet with us, whether you're a backbencher in opposition or the Minister for Health. They do come to us. We do listen to them. We do take their advice, and we do make our judgments based on those facts that we gather and that research that we do. So, whilst I think it has been an opportunity, I think it's been an opportunity for the public to see what actually we do in our everyday as parliamentarians.
Greg Hunt, what leadership values do you believe to be the most important in today's environment? And which of those drive your leadership, the values part of this? And how do the values help you at times of crisis?
Sure. So I think that there are, for me, 4 things. One is vision in itself, and that's not pretending that any one of us is the custodian of a unique vision, but you build a vision on behalf of the nation, and you realise it's contestable. That's the very nature of it. But for people to see that there's a vision. For us, it's an open society and an open economy built on maintaining that safety. The second thing related to that vision is values, and there's a trick, I think. And Anne's been very strong on this, of drawing a distinction between ideology, which is sort of blind adherence to a set of values, and values which are a framing basis but where facts, as you've just said, overlay. The third part is this dialogue where you engage and you learn from. One of the great privileges of our role is, whether you're the minister or you're a backbencher, and having been both, people will, of great merit and standing, will want to inform you. And yes, they have contestable views, but you get access to, Nobel laureates like Brian Schmidt. You get access as an MP to mums and dads who've got kids with cerebral palsy. And so you get that inflow of information that's unlike any other role in society. And I think that's often lost, that there are more and broader inputs. And then the last thing is humility, which may not sound very good coming from a member of parliament, but a certain recognition, I don't mean false humility or shucks stuff, but of recognising it is an immense role and responsibility. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't, but that when you look around, it's a really fine country we have. And that gives you a sense of pride in the country, but humility that you're simply a custodian of the role for a period of time.
Dr. Ali, the values question, do you think about that deeply, about how to approach what you're trying to get an outcome on?
I do. It's interesting, Greg, that you mentioned vision, because in the little survey that I did, and I don't claim that the results of my survey are generalisable at all.
Peer-reviewed.
Yeah, not at all peer-reviewed. But many of the colleagues rated vision as a high value for themselves, but they didn't think that the public valued vision as highly as they did. For me, I think, when I think about, what kind of politician, what kind of parliamentarian I want to be, for me, it's always been about sincerity. And, sincerity for me means, incorporates integrity, incorporates honesty. It incorporates that ability to listen and really, really listen, and then take action on those things that you've heard, whether they are stories of the mum and dad with a kid with cerebral palsy, or facts presented to you from a renowned scientist. For me, if you approach all of that with sincerity, then the other things kind of inevitably flow out of that. If you approach what you do with an honesty and a sincerity, being true to yourself, sometimes it means that you call out your own party on things, and I've done that. You have to be willing to do that. I think you have to be willing to stand up for what's right, and what's right is not always what's popular, and what's right may not always win you favours within your own party. But I remember when I first considered running for Cowan, and my husband is my touchstone to reality. He's the one who keeps me grounded, because he, to me, is just, the everyday bloke. And I remember David and I were watching something on television, and there was a member of parliament who went to shake someone's hand and said, "Hello, I'm so-and-so, are you going to vote for me?" And I remember turning to David and saying, "If I ever become that, you need to tell me it's time to go. I do not ever want to approach the people who I represent as a potential vote, and I don't want them to see me just as a politician. I want to break through that, and I want to have a personal human connection with the people who I have the privilege of representing in Parliament." So I think definitely for me, sincerity and being true to yourself is the guiding principle.
Just want to end on a sort of bigger question, which is,
I thought they've been pretty big questions so far.
I know, you're right, they've been pretty big. But just on sort of our institutions and democracy, and a lot has been written about democracy in crisis and disruption, ideology, far right-wing groups, far left-wing groups, like a disruption to the system. But at the same time, if you look at the mainstream parties, and both of you are in the two mainstream parties in our country, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, we know that party membership is down. We know many citizens were maybe pre-pandemic. We want to test it for post-pandemic, but, disengaged with the political system or with political parties. That was an issue, Greg, for the Victorian Liberal Party in terms of membership and renewal. Dr. Anna Lee, it's been an issue for the Labor Party too, right? Like it's an ongoing issue, these institutions. How do we encourage more Australians to become active and engaged and optimistic about democracy or an engagement? Do you think perhaps this moment provides that reset? And how important will it be for leaders like you two to tackle that, to try and renew our institutions and restore them, make them strong again? Greg?
Sure. So probably two things there. Firstly, I think our Australian institutions have largely stood up and done very well. I haven't seen any of the surveys recently, but I certainly know during last year the trust in government and government institutions rose very significantly. And that was across the board, federal or state, Liberal or Labor. It wasn't, it was about, in a time of crisis, the Australian system held up. The Parliament kept running in strange ways with videos and with smaller numbers, but the Parliament kept running. Committees kept going. The country was able to function. And I think that was a real reflection on Australia and the Australian system, a sort of, let's just get on with it. And there'll be debates and disagreements about measures and approaches, but that central commitment to the cause. Then the second thing in terms of young people, which I think is a great place for me to finish up, young people now have multiple avenues of engagement and in ways that they didn't before. So parliamentary membership, party membership is one way. I'm incredibly heartened by the talent I'm seeing coming through in the backbench in my own side. I see, waves of really talented people, and they're coming in. But I think our task is to try to make the experience and the meaning more relevant. And how do you do that? I think it's got to be a bit more contemporary like this. People don't necessarily want to sit in a single room. There will be time to do that, but they're time poor. So if it can be easy, such as this, I think that improves the experience. And then if people can feel that they can have an almost sort of a direct engagement through the sort of reviews that Anne has done of her colleagues, of having that input. So it's not just one voice, but it's almost like they have a continuing plebiscite where they are giving their opinion and it's being heard as part of the collective, then that gives people a sense that they can play a real role in democracy.
Really good points, actually, Greg. I'd love to hear your insights too, Dr. Anne Ali. Membership's low, disengagement. How do you change that?
I wanted to pick up on something Greg said about democracy, because democracy by its nature is a state of tension. There's no perfect democracy. Democracy by its nature is always in a state of flux. But the measure of a democracy is the strength of the institutions. And as Greg mentioned, he made that really important point there that, in a time of crisis, our institutions proved to be incredibly resilient. Our health institutions, our education institutions, our political institutions stood up to the challenge. And I think that's a really important measure of just how strong our democracy is. Now, the other day I went to a public school and I got to address around 200 Year 9 and Year 10 students. And my first question to them was, put your hand up if you think that the Parliament represents you. One hand went up. One hand among these young people, which I found really kind of disheartening. So I want to come to that point of representation. And I think for young people in particular, as well as as people of all ages, being able to look at the parliament and recognise themselves. And I'm not talking about any kind of in physical appearance or cultural background or anything like that, but knowing that they have a connection or they share something with their member of parliament or the people who are representing them, I think is key. I think that's really important. I think that too many people in the public believe that we are a particular breed of people who is far removed from the everyday. But as Greg said, he goes out into his local community and he's just Greg, the soccer dad and the ballet dad. I go to my local shopping centre, get my hair done at my local shopping centre, and it's, I'm just Anne. I think that's really important. And we need to somehow make a connection between, Greg the dad and Anne, in the shopping centre and doing her shopping, and, who we are in Parliament as parliamentarians. I think that's the key, is that human connection, that personal connection. When we go out and we talk to people, or we have this little spiel where we say, what do you care about? Is it education? Is it jobs? Da 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 da. But when you really break it down, what people want is security, and part of that is a feeling of belonging in their community. They want to know that they have a job and they can put food on the table. They want to know that they can send their kids to school. They want to know that if they get sick, they're looked after. And I think, if we can start talking to people about their well-being and their security, I think we can start to build and restore faith in politics. And I come back to the pandemic and COVID-19 being an opportunity to springboard that.
This I knew would be a good conversation because I know you both, but it's actually exceeded my expectations and hopefully exceeded the expectations of those who have tuned in to this conversation. Thank you, Greg Hunt, and thank you, Dr. Anne Ali. Really appreciate your time, and congratulations to both of you, because now you are not only winners of a prize, which is always exciting, I love a prize personally, but also role models for your colleagues to think about these things more deeply and to make our institutions stronger. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, Greg.
And thank you to those who have viewed this video. The McKinnon Prize in Political Leadership is a non-partisan and independent award recognising outstanding political leadership in all levels of government, deeply non-partisan, looking at the achievements of the leaders that are put forward. I'm Patricia Carvelis. Hopefully we'll see you next year.